A king's kid thinks a king's way. I told you a few weeks ago that Prince Charles, you know, his sons have tutors that train them not to be like you. No matter how great your vision is, it can be destroyed if you don't have values. So your destiny depends on your personal discipline. Character will always protect your vision. Now, why do I teach the kingdom, and why am I going through this so meticulously? Because I'm working on brainwashing. If people say that I'm brainwashing you, they are exactly right. Turn the TV on. I want to brainwash you too. Nothing is worse than the wrong mentality. Because as a man thinketh, so is he. So if you think like a slave, a servant, a subject, if you think like an oppressed person, then that's the way you are. As a man thinketh, so is he. So what you need and I need to do, we need to understand how we ought to think. And the Bible says, a man not ought to think beyond and above that which he should. So what we got to do is find out what we should think like, and then begin to learn to think like that. Printing. And in this book, I tell the story at the beginning of an experiment that was done by some scientists. They wanted to test the power of conditioning. So they had a beautiful dog brought out, and they tied the dog to a stake, and they had the chain at a certain length. And every day they would bring out this nice fresh meat out to the dog, and they would put it just beyond the chain's length. And the dog would run toward the meat. And just before he got to the meat, the chain would yank him back so he couldn't reach it. And every day they would do this practice. They put this fresh meat, and the dog would run toward the meat to get it, and the chain would yank him back, and he would be hurt. And of course, he would keep jumping, trying to get this meat. And for days they did this. And then about 2 weeks later, they brought the meat out, and when they put it down, the dog just sat and looked at it. Then they pushed the meat closer, and the dog just sat and looked at it. The next day, they came out, and they took the chain off the dog. And they put the meat out, and the dog stayed by the stake and just looked at it. They pushed the meat closer, and the dog backed away and just looked at it. He was free. If you've been conditioned to think like a slave all your life, even when the door is open, you stay in prison. I'll make a statement I want you to never forget. Jesus said he's anointed to do something. Luke chapter 4. Here's what he says. He says, the Spirit of God is upon me, for he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. Fine. Then he says, to bind up the brokenhearted. No problem. Then he says, to give sight to the blind. No problem. But then he makes a statement that is very shocking. He says, and to preach, he says, to preach deliverance to the captive, and the opening, and to preach, and to declare the opening of the prison to those who are bound. The way it's written in the original Greek language is the concept is he declares that the door is open to those who are in prison. Get the concept? In other words, Christ doesn't come to open the door. The door is open. He comes to the door and says, hey, you can come out. This book is really about the burden of freedom. It talks about the fact that freedom is really in the mind, not just having chains of your hands. That dog was free, but died of starvation. How many of us, even though we claim to be, can I use the term you always use, religious people? King's kids. Really? A king's kid thinks a king's way. I told you a few weeks ago that Prince Charles, you know, his sons have tutors that train them not to be like you. Did you know that? Prince William is trained not to be like you, not to look like you, not to talk like you, not to walk like you, not to eat like you, not to sit like you, not to dress like you. He is trained not to even think like you. He is conditioned. Now remember, Prince William is born a baby just like you. But by the time he is 5 years old, he don't think like you. By the time he's 5 years old, the adults in the castle are calling him master. What are they doing? They are brainwashing him. Because someday, when Queen Elizabeth dies, that kid got to sit on that throne. And he got to be thinking like the throne. And that's what God is having problems with in the church. God says he gave us dominion, and for us to develop the spirit of dominion.